Next, we have George John from the University of Minnesota, and George will present a little bit with some Q&A. Yeah, I assume you'll take it in between the presentation.
The same as Doug did, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, even though I hadn't seen Doug's presentation before, we actually collaborated virtually to make sure that he's answered all the questions that are going to be asked about my presentation. It's remarkable because I was just sitting there watching. We have a series of different design choices which answer some of the issues that were asked, but which introduce other problems. So let me just launch right into it. First of all, let me just, again, talk about incentives. Just let me set it up. The most common form of incentives we're all familiar with is cash, some form or the other, either through sophisticated stock options and whatnot, or just simple cash. The other one are these plaques and, Salesman of the Year. These are what we would call social incentives, which have a couple of characteristics. In order for them to work, you actually have to have a dinner, and then you give the guy the award. Everybody's got to know about it, right? So it's got to be something you can't just go out and buy a plaque. If you've ever coached a kid's football team, you spend time buying 32 plaques or whatever, however many kids there are. Even the kids who never played get a plaque. Well, that kind of stuff doesn't work. It's got to be scarce, and a lot of stuff that Bob talked about this morning comes into play there. So you see both of these being used as incentives. What I want to talk about today is really stuff in the middle, and I'll describe that in a second. These are tangible rewards, they're extrinsic rewards. They're cash-like, but they're not cash. The most common form of this, and there's an entire industry around this, are these points programs. It's very much like your American Express rewards card, except it's a company-specific program. You rack up points, and then you get to redeem it for merchandise off a catalog. Okay, that's the most common form. Again, some round numbers in the economy. There's billions and billions. I think $45 billion is how much the Incentive Federation estimates is actually expended on these programs economy-wide. And in contrast to our understanding of tangible rewards and intangible rewards, there's very little we know about how these cash-like tangible rewards work. So that's essentially the question we're after here, okay? So if you want to compare these things, the storyline, and Doug is much more fluent than I am in expressing that. There's some magic words he used called principal agent. The idea is that if you give people money, they're going to work, and they're going to balance off effort against. It's an economic view of the world. Fair enough, okay? For intangible rewards, there are psychological benefits. And it's the same thing. You motivate people, but you motivate the effort. I'm going to use motivation and effort sort of synonymously here. Through psychological benefits, they feel status. I'm the salesperson of the year. If you've ever seen that movie Des Moines, you know what I'm talking about. It's great. There are any number of movies about salespeople, and most of them work off the status and peer recognition things that come with these intangibles. But the problem is, almost any argument you make for a non-cash intangible would tend to be trumped by one or the other. It's sort of like if A is better than B, why not do A? And if B is better than A, then why not do B? But why do something that's neither A nor B, okay? So it has smaller economic benefits in cash. Think about it. There's some margin to be paid to the vendor, so right away you lose that. And these are not inexpensive programs to run. Cash is much more flexible. No matter what catalog you have, it cannot match Amazon, okay? So, and it probably won't match Amazon on those prices. So there's all this sort of friction, if you will, if you think of cash-like as not cash, all right? So you're introducing a bunch of extra friction. Why touch your nose this way? Go ahead and touch it this way, give it to them as money, right? On the other hand, if you really want psychological benefits, it's not clear what kind of psychological benefits these things offer. Let me give you some institutional details here. These things are treated like your pay. It's private. You know it. Your company knows it, but your colleagues don't know it, unless you work for a public state university, in which case you can go find out anybody's pay by going onto our website. And believe me, people do that. I'm the associate dean. I'm sort of amazed how many people go out and check it out. So we're all intrigued in where we stand in the social status of schemes, as somebody else making more money than I am. But that doesn't actually work for these catalog points. Your points are yours, they're private, they're redeemed privately, and most of the things they're redeemed for are also private.
Does their family and friends know?
Very good question. Let me come to at the end of the day, you'll see the results. Come back to that in a very great, it's up to to answer the question directly at this company, it's up to the salesman to share it with their family and friends.
They do.
Yeah, some do, some don't.
That's a psychological game.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, you know, it depends on the family. I think there's heterogeneity there that we don't observe. Let me tell you what we do know, and then we'll take it from there. So who are these folks? We're looking at people who sell frozen products, frozen food products, pizza, what the heck, to grocery stores, okay? So these are people who call in grocery stores, they have accounts, and they sell frozen products. It's mostly pizza. Now, one of the things is that there are lots of other details I'm going to suppress. Let me just flash to the point I want to get at. Their pay turns out to be almost all incentives. There's a very small fraction of non-incentive pay. I'm going to just suppress that. So they get paid a commission, a straight commission, which is good for us for lots of reasons. They get a commission on sales, like that. And when they hit their first target, they get now these numbers are scaled up for company confidentiality reasons, but they get a certain lump sum bonus, plus they get a certain number of points. And then when they get to the next target, they get a certain number of dollars more, and they get a certain number of points more, okay? So it goes like, there were 3 particular targets these guys had. Target, 8% over target, 15% over target, and then they keep getting the commission. That's the basic structure of the plan. Again, there are details about draw and things like that I'm going to suppress, because we didn't change any of those, so it's good for us in that sense. Okay, so the point is that's their current plan. And we want to do a study which asks the question, do these things work? So now we need a baseline. So the baseline is, what would an equally costly plan do for the company if the company spent the exact same amount of money on it? So we didn't change the structure. What we did essentially was to, well, anyway, I'm going to skip this. The program vendors think they all work. The company's ambivalent. This whole project started because this company thought it was wasting money, essentially. They want to know whether it worked or not. And the academic research, as far as we can tell, is pretty silent. There's a lot of stuff on the psych benefits, a lot of stuff on the economic benefits. This cash-like stuff in the middle, we couldn't find anything. Okay, so what do? Remember, that was our old plan. We essentially took all their points, converted it at the same level of target achievement into all cash. And what's the conversion rate we use? We use the cost to the company of the conversion rate. So we're actually being very generous. We're taking that entire margin, you're paying the program vendor and dumping it into their paycheck. Okay? It costs this company $3.75. Again, these numbers are scaled up to generate one of these points. So all we did was to give them the same commission. When they hit their targets, instead of 20 points, we gave them $75. 20 times 375. Next target, instead of 40 points, they got $150, plus the other lump sum they're getting. Ditto for the third thing. Okay, so instead of 20, 40, 60 points, they got 75, 150, and 225. Okay? So it's important to understand that the structure stays the same. The cost to the company stays the same. So it's a reasonably sensible test of whether that non-cash-like element has any magical properties to it. Okay? So what do we have? We have data from 590 territories, essentially the entire United States. They're not in some markets, but essentially the whole US, over a 2-year period. We don't use the data continuously for 2 years, so let me show you what we have. We have historical data, and we have data before our intervention, and we have data after our intervention. What we essentially have is this. The compensation plan from July to December of 2010 is what I call historical data. We changed the plan in October, so you can see that we have historical data for the entire pre- and post-period for the original compensation plan, which I'll call cash plus points. In the pre-intervention period, it still stays as cash plus points, and it's converted to all cash in the post-intervention period from October, November, December. Okay? We observe sales outputs, and we have their sales targets, the quotas. We know the quotas, and we know their sales output. How much time do I have left? Oh, good, okay. I want to point something out which connects to what Doug was doing. Most of you may not realize how crucial this point is, but we actually observed the sales weekly in the pre and post period. That turns out to be absolutely crucial in figuring out the effort they're putting out. Because what we would like to do is to find out whether A, the plans work, and B, if they do work, why they work. We'd like to show that it has an effect and effort. There's no way to identify that effort. And the reason we can identify the effort, if I can indulge myself for just a minute here, it's that as you approach the target, you're getting closer and closer and closer to the target. People change, they're solving that same dynamic program that Doug was talking about, so they change their effort level based on how close they are to the target. Okay? And it's because we see this weekly sales, we can do a fair bit of Greek and algebra in there and computer code and solve that out. So it was actually crucial for us to get these weekly observations. That's my 30 seconds of the academics in the room. Like Doug, we solved something called a BBL. It's Barry Blanket Levens. Instead of there are engineers in the room, you know that you solve your dynamic programs using a Bellman equation. It's the same stuff that gets featured here, but it's all Greek if you don't want to think about it. Okay, what did we find? Sales went down by $3.5 million a month. This is barely scaled, so I'm giving you a pretty good sense of the magnitude here. Okay? They went down. I'm showing you the entire distribution of sales, so you can see that that red line, which is after the intervention, moves a little bit to the left. It's not just average sales, it's actually changing. There's heterogeneity under these salespeople. People reacted differently, and there's a pattern to the reaction. So this is a massive drop in sales, okay? 6.6% drop in sales overall, distributed unevenly. And it's distributed to a greater degree amongst the higher performing people. Right? So I've cut it by quartiles of achievement. So 1, 2, 3, 4, the bottom 25% is the top left, top 25% is the top right. You can see visually the effect is greatest among the highest performing folks. So not only is it working, it works even better for the people who really put out a lot of effort. I haven't shown you anything in effort. So right off, if you just did this as a straight up experiment, you get this, and these are highly significant. I mean, I'm not even going to show you the statistical analysis and controlling for seasonality and controlling for history. And so we have an almost perfect control for potential, which is the targets, which is the company's best expression of what they think is going to happen. So you can control for all of that, and you can get these results, and it's incredibly significant. So what's going on? There we do something called counterfactuals, much like what Doug was talking about, where we're trying to get beyond what the observed data is allowing us to say. The observed data shows us that sales went down 6.6%, which means that the plans are working, but why do they work? But what we want to show is to show that these things correspond to effort changes. Let's use the baseline of the all-cash effort as 100. Okay, let me just, I'm sort of normalizing these numbers here. With all that algebra I talked about, you can show that there are two segments of salespeople. Instead of calculating it for one salesman at a time, we use a two-segment approach. We just classify these salespeople. We don't classify them. You sort of let the machine have two segments of folks out there, and everybody dropped in effort with the intervention. Or to put it another way, everybody had higher effort before we intervened. So after we intervened, they're giving us 100% effort. The average in segment 1 was 101, which is a bump, but not a huge bump. The average of segment 2 was 106. There are roughly twice as many people in segment 1 as in 2. So about a third of your people really, truly love these points. Okay? Overall, you can see the effort aggregated across folks is 103. So that's significant. So effort dropped in response to the new all-cash plan. That tracks the sales results. So we're trying to show why these things happen. Okay. Another way to think about it is, remember that it cost the company $3.75 to create a point. With these effort calculations, we can go back and see what they actually value these points at. Now, remember, this company never told them it was 375. It's nowhere there. A little background here, if you go and check the stuff in the catalog, you can get it on Amazon cheaper. You know, you can get a 42-inch plasma set or an LCD set on that catalog. It'll be cheaper on Amazon. So it's not a terrific buy, so you don't really know as a salesperson what it is. We know it's 375 to the firm, okay? So the cost is 375 to the firm to create these points. Cell one, whoops, oh, that's great, okay. Cell one, the segment one liked it at about 475, and for segment two is about $5 and something. In both groups of salespeople, it's higher than the 375. And again, the overall average is about 4 something, I forget, it's in the paper. So you've got something that costs you $375 to produce. When you give it to them in the form of points, it's suddenly magically worth more than that. So why is this? So let me back up a little bit and appeal to something you heard earlier today, bits and pieces that appeal to the same logic. The idea is this. We have buckets of money that we spend as a family. You have sort of the family money that you spend on necessities and stuff. Then you have the stupid money you're going to waste in Vegas, all kinds of stuff. So a classic demonstration of that is when gas prices go up, people shift their consumption of gas way more than it actually affects their family budget. It's because they've got a budget called gas money, okay? And every time you get an increase in gas prices, you'll see a huge change in reaction to that, especially changing from premium to unleaded, which you can justify only if you appeal to these different buckets. Hence the title is mental accounting. There's lots of demonstrations of that. You saw another one that Doug was talking about. Losses and gains are not viewed the same way. A dollar lost, if you frame it as a loss, stings about twice as much as a dollar gain, okay? That's another idea that we don't just aggregate gains and losses together. We have a reference point. The question is, where does these reference points come from? That's a big unknown. But we do know that people use these buckets. And in the background in our math, we have a two-dimensional utility function, which is justifiable only if you have these buckets, okay? So, but we did something more than that. We wanted to find out if we could get a better handle, a little bit more exploratory handle on who these people are who really like the points a lot. So remember, everybody liked our points. Everybody liked it better than 375. Segment 2 really liked it. So if we could get some correlates, if we could figure out what correlates with the second group more so than the first group, then that gives us some clue as to why it is that what are the drivers of this liking for using different buckets, if you want to think of it that way, or liking for points, if you want to think of it this way, in a slightly different way. So the first point is, so we did a survey to a subset of these salespeople. A couple of points here. We don't have a control group here because of precisely the problem Doug was talking about. You get interpersonal comparisons, things like that. So we had everybody switched over. At the same time, they would normally fiddle around with their sales compensation plans. We also had some issues about, well, maybe people just don't like changes. So we do some checks to see if people with a lot of banked points dislike the change, things like that. We don't find any of that stuff, okay? All 590 like the points, but especially those folks who are from households that spend more on necessities. We asked them about these questions in the survey. What's going on here? If you only have a little bit of money to spend on discretionary items, the bulk of your budget is taken up by the family budget, you're going to hoard these things. You're going to like these things better because you get to spend it on, it's your stupid money. That's our conjecture. But we do know it correlates with those households that spend more on on necessities. The second piece is that the people who like the points are people who think more concretely about what they're going to buy with their cash. If you think of cash as just an enabling device that lets you buy happiness, you don't seem to like it as much as opposed to, I really want that vacation in Vegas. I really want that plasma TV set. That's what I'm going to buy. When they concretize what they're going to do in the expenditures, you see the people in segment 2 are more likely to tell you exactly what they're going to do with the money. With the money, not the objects, okay? But, and there are things it doesn't correlate with. There's no difference in redemption frequency or what they're redeemed for, or how often they're redeemed. And there's no difference in the type of merchandise, whether it's hedonic stuff or utilitarian things like, a crock pot or something. It doesn't matter what they redeem, how much they redeem, when they redeem. It goes back to these sort of more abstract drivers. And that is it.
I'd like to actually start with a question for you. One of the things I was thinking as I saw you present is I was thinking, well, what if that bonus pay or that variable pay becomes a greater part of their compensation instead of a small part of the compensation? It seems to me that when it's a small part, it's easy to then budget that for some sort of a special occasion or something like that. When it comes a larger part, then cash becomes a bigger factor for you. So would you think that it would have a difference in the way that mental...
First, let me give you some baselines. Their bonus cash plus points equals about 15% of the take-home.
Okay.
So it's not immaterial, but it's not 40%. Okay,
Right.
so that's just a little point of information there. I would not want to extend this to an all-bonus system where it's a 0-1 game. They're getting commissions all along, so we're talking about bonuses. So I want to stay in that world. I don't think it applies at all to a 0-1 game. The dynamics would be very different. So that would be my response.
Okay, but there's some point in between there where a transition you would feel takes place where a person starts weighting the cash more than they would ever weight the points. Of course, in an extreme situation, I understand. I'm just thinking that there's a bridge point in that. Would you agree with that?
There's probably a bridge point, but I couldn't tell you where that would be.
Okay.
It's hard to guess.
Does it have to pay tax on the cash value of the points?
Good point. In this particular instance, they paid tax on everything. The way this program is set up, it was all equally taxable. Okay, so they were not getting a break on the taxes.
Let's go to the question.
You get a 1099 on that, and it's usually, we did it 1 year, and that was it. The payout, like you said, you're looking at something at Amazon for $750, and you get taxed at $1250. So it's like very disincentive when they see what the cost is.
And yet it works. That was a surprise to us.
Paulo? Yeah.
In practical terms, isn't it easy for companies to let the people choose what they prefer? I mean, if they can quantify the value of points, then let them choose. Because otherwise, I assume that oftentimes it could be that me as a salesperson, I assume that the conditions at which you get the merchandising from any company is better than the cost that I have to pay for getting the same product, which would explain why I would prefer to have the point.
I think academics call it 2 always trumps 1, right? So 2 prices always trumps 1 price. So the real question is it practical? Is that a practical comparison? Doug was saying that he could have implemented individual compensation plans. Let me tell you the incredible, I don't think there's a person sitting out here who's worked in sales where each salesperson had an individual compensation plan. Those are incredibly rare. Those are reserved for high-level executives. They're tailored. There are too many comparisons that come up. So now the question becomes, why don't we just offer a menu? Hey, you want points, you got points. You want dollars, you got dollars. We've done several studies like this. It seems to turn, let me go back to this individualized plans versus common plans. It seems to turn on administrative efficiencies. It is almost impossible to do these individualized plans. And for whatever is worth, the gain from doing individualized plans, even in Doug's example, is not that great. His 21% is within hailing distance of his uniform his punishment plan. So the cumulative evidence seems to show that customization and menu-driven stuff theoretically should help, but it's not that big a gain.
And also, just to answer something really quickly to you, we've actually started doing some research in this particular area of opting versus not. So Raghu, Tom, and I are working on some stuff on that. One of the things you see is that people don't necessarily opt into their optimal plan. They often attribute themselves or put themselves in a plan that would be a suboptimal plan. And then the question is what happens then at that point. And so it's actually a much more complicated question than that. Yeah.
If the difference is what you called out with Doug's and yours, if you're playing on the margins, what do you think is really going on that drives a human being?
Oh, this is not at the margins. I can make an unequivocal statement. Points work, period. Nobody pays points as a total substitute for cash. That was the spirit of the question Mike is asking. So I want to be very clear. Points in the way they are used in industry work, absolutely. I mean, I have to stand with the results. Now, would there be another context where it doesn't work? Possibly. But as far as I can tell, this was a shocker to us. We just, on a scaled basis, lost the company $50 million in that experiment, okay? Multiply it 3.5 by 12. So, yeah, they work. I wouldn't extrapolate it to 100% points or 100% cash.